Hare Krishna, back again. Try to just have a couple more and then I'm going to be done with this series. And then I hope to move on to something that's a little bit more transcendental subject matter, like Sri Mayapur Dham. I would like to, I'd like to do that. But let's finish this. I think there's probably two more talks. But this is part 36, and it's continued from, we're doing the section between 2020 to 2024. We've already had two, now this is the third one. I'm getting through this a little slowly, and that's probably going to happen again in this talk, but anyway, who cares who's counting? So let me just offer my prayers. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Vicharane Nirvishesha Srinivadi Bhaskacha De Satavane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Vanshakaputarupyascha Kripasanvevicha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. All right, let's see if I have this straight here. Not very good at all this technology, but somehow it's going on. So we're moving on. In my last talk, I mentioned a couple of books that and I talked about them quite a bit, because that I wanted to encourage devotees to read. And actually Pranada listened to it and said I should put the link to how to get these books. So I'm going to do that soon. I should have thought of that. Anyway, but I'm going to talk about another book because, this happened, we're talking in 2022, and this is a book also that I think is important, was written by my husband, and it was, published around this time that we're talking about. And this book is about the time with Srila Prabhupada during his final days. It's called Back to Vrindavan, and for three reasons. Because Srila Prabhupada at some point, he was traveling and then he decided, let's go back to Vrindavan. I'm going to stay there to my final days. And then, of course, Srila Prabhupada himself went back to Vrindavan, Goloka Vrindavan. And also my husband had gone away from Prabhupada's service, and he came back to Vrindavan. So that's the reason. And this book is not part of his Transcendental Diary series, which I spoke about in previous talks. He had completed 5 volumes from the diary that he kept during the time he was Srila Prabhupada's servant. And there are still 2 more volumes pending to complete that series, and that is an important series also, not just because it's my husband, but because it's not a reflection. Sometimes we're all telling about, oh, I remember this, I remember that, but after 20, 30, 40, 50 years, well, how much, maybe we don't remember it so clearly. But these books are from what was written at the time, a diary kept day by day as it was happening. So they're very authentic. Sociologists will see it like that. They'll look at something that was done at the time, you know. But unfortunately, as I said, there's supposed to be 2 more volumes, but because of his, you know, deteriorating health with Parkinson's, it's just been too difficult for him to finish the series. And, you know, it's a bit discouraging. But there's also another smaller diary that he kept at a later date after he left Srila Prabhupada's personal service, which was, I think, early 77. So you can imagine, after being with Srila Prabhupada for a year and a half, or, you know, more than that, 24/7, day and night, being with him, what it would be like, you know, to leave his service. You know, must have been, well, he'll describe it when he gets to that point, hopefully, you know, heart-wrenching. But Prabhupada sent him to Australia to become the GBC. So that was exciting also. So it was a mix of feelings. But he did a smart thing before he left. He signed up to come back later in the year as Srila Prabhupada's GBC representative, because, you know, they took turns that they would spend time with Prabhupada. So he signed up for that. So he came back later in the year, and that is when he kept this second diary. So, you know, we encouraged him, because he was having a hard time to finish his diary series, that he jump ahead to this smaller diary, because it was during this time when Srila Prabhupada was only in his room. So there were not morning walks or lectures, and so, you know, this diary would be a lot easier to write. So it took a long time, but he finally managed to get it done and was published around this time that we're talking. So, you know, this diary, and, you know, there are others, Tamal Krishna Maharaj's diary, and others that have written about Srila Prabhupada's final days. And I really want to urge all devotees to read the accounts of these pastimes, because there is just so much to learn from Srila Prabhupada's example in departing this world. And, you know, no doubt in years to come there'll be many challenges, as we always face. So, you know, to be equipped to face those challenges, all the members of our society should be aware of our history. Recently, I was very surprised. I met someone who was twice initiated and had been, you know, in ISKCON for at least 10 years. And, you know, when I was being introduced, as, you know, my name's Sitala, you probably don't know me, but you probably know my husband, Harisu, you've probably heard of him. And he was like, no, I've never heard of him. Who is he? And I was like, oh my gosh, you know. It means you probably doesn't know much about Srila Prabhupada's pastimes, and that is not good. You know, it's by observing the person Bhagavat that the philosophy and practice comes to life. And as our founder Acharya, you know, everyone should know what Srila Prabhupada did and the details of it. It's important for all the generations to come. And also, you know, there are various controversies built around these, especially these final days. So it's important for anybody affiliated with ISKCON to, you know, read the books, listen to the tapes, and know our philosophy in order to be very clear, you know, about what transpired. Because, well, unfortunately, there are many devotees who continue to believe and propagate the theory that Srila Prabhupada was poisoned by his own servants. Um, well, that would be, that would include my husband, who I'm quite familiar with and know his heart, and, would include Bhakti Charu Maharaj, one of the most humble, gentle Vaishnavas in our mission, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, whom Prabhupada trusted, that would include all these people, were the murderers, So I did talk about this in a previous talk, but because it continues to spread, it's important to get this issue straight. And during these talks, I really, I try not to take any specific stance on, the issues going on, because my purpose in doing these talks is, it's just to share my experiences as one devotee amongst thousands in the movement. It's not to tell you what to think or what's right or wrong. I just try to encourage that we all be as informed as possible and take a balanced approach towards all the issues that, are raised, and in hopes that, most of these things will just resolve in time as we advance. I mean, that's the key there, as we advance, hopefully. But this poison theory, I just cannot be silent about this, because to me it just seems to be such a terrible, terrible insult to Srila Prabhupada, what to speak of his servants, but to Srila Prabhupada himself, because to accept this theory, you would have to believe that Srila Prabhupada was an ordinary old man who couldn't tell what was going on around him. And that is preposterous for anyone who actually knows Srila Prabhupada. Knows that he was always acutely aware of his surroundings, and that was up until the last day. His senses are always so sharp. And Yamuna told me once that, she told me that she had served Prabhupada some chapatis, and he told her how many days prior the flour had been ground, and he was correct. And that's, how refined his senses were. So to think that he was helpless and controlled by these young disciples, that he was fooled, and that he didn't know the heart of his own servants, it's just offensive and ignorant. And I just have to say that. And also to think that, there was the Kaviraj, one of the best in India, that he could not tell that someone was slipping him poison. That's also absurd. He was constantly checking Srila Prabhupada's pulse, and he was acutely aware of the subtleties of his condition. He was often, so surprised by how Srila Prabhupada's pulse could suddenly change. It was, and he was amazed how Srila Prabhupada was showing no pain when, anyone else in his condition would be just writhing in pain. And he understood clearly that Srila Prabhupada was not ordinary, and these were not ordinary things going on. And then, of course, what to speak of, to think that his disciples who were there, who were serving him hand and foot, who gave their lives to Srila Prabhupada, and who Srila Prabhupada loved and trusted, that they were capable of devising this horrific plot. I don't know, it's just shocking. that many devotees believe this. And I know there's things written about it that are very convincing, and I don't care. I don't want to hear it. I was there, I saw these people, I know these people, and my husband's one of them. And, you know, of course we know that, you know, some of Prabhupada's disciples and his servants even have done, you know, some bad things and may have faults. But, you know, the one redeeming quality we all have, you know, we are all full of faults. But that one thing that's very real and genuine, that redeeming quality, is, you know, their love for Srila Prabhupada. And, you know, to try to take that most precious thing away, to deny the love that existed, you know, to turn it, you know, try to turn it into something dark and ugly and, you know, even demoniac, you know, this is just the most painful and vicious abuse. And, you know, and even philosophically, Krishna would allow this to happen to his dear, most pure devotee. I mean, I don't know. I keep bringing this up because I think it must be so confusing for many, because the people that are, you know, that propagate these things are very active on the internet. And, you know, other people who don't believe it, they're not active on the internet. So, you know, especially younger devotees, it must be difficult to hear things and wonder, well, what really went on? Because we know things have gone on that are unsavory, you know. But, it, you know, because it continues and seems to even increase, that recently there have been more accusations that during this time there were 100 or even up to 200 tapes that were recorded during these final days, and they've been hidden or they've been destroyed by someone. I don't know if they accuse somebody specifically. I don't know. I just saw it somewhere, and I saw it being shared. And, you know, this is another absurd proposal. And I want to read the testimony of Srila Prabhupada's nurse, Abhiram Prabhu, who, you know, was there throughout all of this, who is not a GBC, who has, who was the nurse. So obviously he would really be aware of what was going on. And so he's written this just very recently because he just discussed it. He said he preaches a lot in India, and many Indian people say, is it true, that Prabhupada was poisoned? And, so these things get out, and it's very disturbing to him. So he's written this recently. I really appreciate that he did that because it's very authoritative. Here's a person that was there, who was the nurse, who was asked by Srila Prabhupada. Anyway, I'm just going to get it up and read it to you because it's helpful. Okay, so he says, this is what he wrote. To all devotees following Srila Prabhupada, please accept my obeisances. There is a story going around confidently alleging that 100 or 200 tapes went missing from the last 6 months of Srila Prabhupada's departure, Leela. Now, if such tapes ever existed, I would have known and, operated the tape recorder, as during those months, especially June, July, August, September, October, I had been appointed by Srila Prabhupada to act as his nurse. And he had instructed me, quote, never leave my side day or night. So from July 77, I slept next to him on the floor and worked all day with him in Vrindavan, London, Bombay, and back to Vrindavan for his final manifest pastimes. So we generally did not record much in those days, as he was hardly speaking, except occasionally. And that for only, an unpredictable minute or maybe 5 at the most, with long pauses included. So these were casual exchanges with a few important statements that were random and impossible to predict. So naturally, half of these brief comments would just be about, his physical issues or requests. So when he finally did restart translation, it was me that he first told to go get the tape recorder because it was not kept in the room he was staying in. And my point and my testimony is that there were not 100 or 200 tapes produced as imagined and alleged. This is all very convenient for those who want to demonize the leaders of that time, to raise themselves up, or to promote some other criminal conspiracy. But this missing tape theory is not possibly a truth. No doubt many of our early ISKCON pioneers eventually failed or disappointed us, all in different ways, but that does not reduce them from being true heroes and worthy of our love, to being worthy of being turned into monsters, except within the minds of those who have not accepted or understood how deeply Srila Prabhupada appreciated their many sacrifices and how clearly he could read what was in their minds. At no time did I observe that Srila Prabhupada was not in a state of clear awareness of the physical world and those of us surrounding him. As before, he remained in superconsciousness of his surroundings, which is just a natural byproduct of being Krishna conscious. In my view, there could not be any significant number of tapes unknown to us. If any went missing, it could not have come from those last 6 months. I have no motive to protect our past or present ISKCON leaders, as I am one of many amongst us whom have been disappointed, neglected, and unofficially abandoned. I do not, quote, eat their salt, nor aspire to it. I continue to follow my vows in old age and dedicate myself to preaching Prabhupada's teachings on my own. I do wish them well and admire what they do in preaching, but I am free to speak truth on any subject without fear of ISKCON leaders. I am well aware that from this text I will now receive a storm of ad hominem attacks on my character and integrity. In Kali Yuga, no good deed goes unpunished. So be it. But I know that by daring to speak out, I will suffer some and benefit nothing in this world. My testimony here is simply to honor the truth as Srila Prabhupada would expect of me. My loyalty is only to him and the true vision of Krishna that he promotes for the benefit of all good souls who seek his shelter. This includes both those who originate this misguided rumor and also all the followers and leaders of ISKCON. May we all meet soon in Srila Prabhupada's next Divine Leela. Abhiram Das. Very clear. So this is just in hopes that this is helpful for those who feel some uncertainty or confused by the things that, that are propagated, on Facebook or social media sites. But, it's best to take the time to educate ourselves and then put these issues to bed and get on with what's really important is practicing and preaching Krishna consciousness, But still, I think because this is kind of pervasive, these attitudes, I think it might be useful to take some time to try to explore the possible reasons why it is or how it is that God brothers or God sisters can come to have so much disregard, even hatred for their own God brothers or sisters, and why it is that in recent years there has been, an increase of devotees lashing out at each other or making harsh accusations and, inciting angry discussions. Of course, we know there has always been, there's always been different points of views and challenges amongst the devotees from the early days. There's always issues. And I'm sure there always will be. It will go on. But I've never seen, in all these 50 years, more, it's going on to 55 now, but I've never seen so much anger and ugliness amongst devotees, since, I think maybe since COVID time. And it's just, I find it, very disturbing and unsettling, and probably others do, and that's why I'm talking about it. So, it's going strong now. So I want to reflect on the possible reasons for it. Previously, in previous talks, I would talk about, go through maybe 10 years or so, and then I would reflect on it, but now we've arrived at current times, so I'm just going to include reflections here while I'm speaking about it. Because these are things that can destroy our movement, that can kill faith and can cause devotees to lose trust. And so it's just not something to ignore. As Srila Prabhupada, we know that he said that, we could only be destroyed from within. And so I think we all have to consider, why this is happening, how we should respond to it, and what can we do about it. Of course, we know this is happening everywhere in the world today. Social media has really facilitated it. We're living in difficult and changing times. People are frustrated and upset with many things. I saw that there's a best-selling book called The Age of Angry, The Age of Anger, subtitle, The History of the Present, which it attempts to explain. I haven't read it, but just kind of flashed through. It attempts to explain, this like great wave of anger and distrust and hatred and hyper-nationalistic politics and, all that's just, sweeping our world. So, this tendency to hate on each other, it is permeating the atmosphere of the world, and it's catchy, like a virus. It's very easy to catch it, especially if we're not satisfied with our own lives or with the institution, or, if we're frustrated in any way, And we see it in the world, and we see it within our society, that there is a lot of frustration and dissent and divisiveness. There's dissatisfaction, there's disappointment with leaders, gurus, so many things. And often for very good reasons. We know unsavory things have happened, they continue to happen, and there are a lot of things that need to be recognized, and they need to be addressed and resolved, institutionally and personally, and that is welcome, that's needed, it's necessary. But how we can do it effectively, how do we do it without becoming nasty people? And I'm quite sure that online social media battles are not going to effectively address, the many concerns that we have. Endless texting, it seems to just increase dissension and confusion. And it tends to just bring disgruntled people together to increase the griping. So, why are devotees doing this? Vaishnavas. What do they hope to achieve? What is the motive? Yes, it's a sign of the times. The same thing going on in the mundane world. But, this is it's supposed to be a Vaishnava society. Aren't we supposed to be different? So, how do we understand the abundance of, hateful and resentful messages? Because often it doesn't sound like these texts are necessarily born out of a desire to improve things, but rather to break things apart. So, what else is at play here? What else is driving, these angry narratives? I think it behooves all of us, for the sake of our movement and for our own spiritual progress, to examine, what's going on. And not because I'm not trying to point fingers here. I'm trying to understand, first of all, my own attitudes and, what I need to change within myself, and also to consider, what our society needs in order to revive enthusiasm and faith, and to drive out cynicism and darkness. So, let's look at the anger issue. Why is there so much of it among devotees? That even, even from a mundane perspective, psychologists understand that anger is very often, it is a mask. Anger, it often hides sadness, grief, hurt, frustration, disappointment, fear, shame, insecurity, self-hate, so many things that might be beneath the surface. And anger is an easy way to keep these truths, buried beneath the surface. So, at least when we're aware of this, it helps us to understand ourselves better, and also to understand others better, what is going on with them. Like personally, I often hear a lot of grief in the angry voices of devotees, especially ones who joined early. Over time, the movement, they spent building, it in their whole youth. And now, it's changed so much, and they don't relate, or they don't fit, or they don't agree with how things are unfolding. And, some of these devotees, maybe they were really important devotees in the early days, and now they're kind of receded into the shadows, and who knows who they are and who cares. They don't necessarily get any validation, and like what they got from Srila Prabhupada. And, just that Srila Prabhupada's gone, that he's not, but sometimes people feel that way, there can be a real feeling of loss, of grief, and that makes everything just look wrong. It's not like it's used to be. I don't like it. And so, this kind of grief and sadness, it easily turns to anger. And I know devotees who feel this way. And, I've also experienced some feelings like that on occasion. As to some extent, these are natural emotions that, result from change and growth and even just getting old. Feeling sadness for what is gone. It's over, this is over, something that you loved, someone that you love. And of course, this grief is certainly not at all limited to the older generation. It's similar feelings, they arise, in different ways in everyone. And, I also, if you just hear, try to hear beneath the surface, I hear a lot of hurt beneath the anger. Devotees that have had bad experiences, they've been ignored or they've been pushed aside, or, they feel invisible or undervalued, or they have no voice, especially if, there's been unaddressed abuse or neglect. It's very understandable that this kind of deep hurt, turns to anger. And, and also we see, the hurt, it also shows up, when we look at our own life and see, where I am and is not where I want to be. And it hurts to feel like, all this time is just slipping through your fingers. And that you've maybe been, living small or hiding from yourself or just failing spiritually. It's easier to be angry than hurt. Also, we hear a lot of frustration, guilt. It erupts into anger when we want things to be better. In this society and in ourselves, but we just can't do it. We can't do anything. We feel unable to change ourselves or change the movement. We feel, disempowered. These are all natural feelings that arise, and often the anger is just a cry for help. So, when we see it in ourselves, we need to seek help if we need help. And when we see it in others, we should at least try to be the help for others who we see crying out in this way. Because, it's well known that when such feelings, although these are all natural feelings that arise, but if they go unacknowledged, they grow. And they can really affect our mental and physical health. Maybe, we start to lash out more, or we blame others more, and, just feel the world is unfair, the leaders are cheaters, and, in so many ways, we develop, pervasive distrust and suspicion of others. And it leads to despair and depression. And over time, again, unaddressed, it can turn very ugly, So recognizing these underlying emotions, I think, is the first step towards managing them in ourselves, and also in understanding what others are struggling with. Because, until we reach anartha nivriti, until we've gotten past that, Negative emotions can overtake us and cause havoc in our spiritual progress. And I've seen it happen many times, to people that, started out really sweet devotees. And then, this or that happened, and then it was a downward spiral. So, we shouldn't be naive that, oh, we're devotees, we're above these things, not at all. To practice sadhana bhakti effectively, we need to regularly examine our attitudes, our motivations, our own emotions. There's no self-realization without self-examination. Where am I blocked? How can I improve? What triggers me? As devotees, we should be observant, So now, need a drink. I think I can hear devotees that may protest to what I'm saying. I suspect there are some that won't necessarily resonate with what I'm saying here, or they might be, there might even be an indignant outcry coming from, some keyboard warriors who really believe that their anger is justified because they're just protecting Srila Prabhupada's movement by calling it out or exposing things that need to be known, or cheating gurus or abusive leaders or whatever the case may be. And of course, there are things that we should be angry about and that need to be called out. But we should be careful to not become overly self-righteous and to see carefully our motivations. Because Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he clearly explains under what conditions we're right to express our anger or to call out another person. And I have that quote here. I'll read. He says, quote, "If the intention behind reflection on someone else's sins is to, if the intention behind reflection on someone's sins is to ensure their ultimate welfare, to benefit the world, or enhance one's own spiritual growth, then such reflection is truly auspicious and free from fault." So he shows us when it's okay if our motivations and intentions are like that. And if that is then the intention, then that is good. We know devotees can use anger, to help, to instruct, or to bring light to wrongdoing, But such a devotee is not an angry person. They may use anger, but we don't become angry people. There's a world of difference between the two. We have to be careful. Our acharyas, clearly often use anger to wake others up, but their intention was never to hurt or to harm or to get revenge on anyone. The intention was always to benefit the person. In, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who could speak so strongly, but he said, "But let me not desire anything but the highest good for my worst enemies." That is the attitude of a Vaishnava. I mean, of course, that is a very high thing, but at least we can respect, appreciate, and be humbled by it. That's how an acharya feels. And, Srila also Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he gives a warning that he says, here, I have that. Talking without reason about other people is extremely averse to devotional service. Many people talk about others to establish their own reputation. And being envious, some people are accustomed to discuss others' character. And the minds of those who are busy in such topics can never be fixed on the lotus feet of Krishna. Talking about others should be rejected in all respects, unquote. So, we have to look at our own consciousness. We have to make sure our motivations are truly in line with our acharyas, or at least aspiring to be in line. So, if I claim to be, that I'm just trying to correct others, if I make that claim, then I should be willing first to examine myself and ask myself questions. Do I get so obsessed with the negative I see that I just can't see any good in others? Or, is my desire to, expose truth, is it just unrelenting? Has it become my identity or my lifestyle? Or, do I feel the urge to add nasty comments to every text I read? So if we see these tendencies in ourselves or others, then we know that we have become, sick. And if we don't, take care of that sickness, if we don't get a cure for it, it turns into a very serious disease, the hating disease, which is like a cancer that eats up the host. And, it happens. I've seen it happen. And, it's a psychology that's been studied. The psychology of haters. And, devotee hater, we're no different. They explain that, haters are often the kind of people who are deeply flawed themselves. So they tend to project their own flaws on others. Or they're the kind of people who are very insecure. And, thus they can't stand to see others succeed where they may be failing. And, or they're people who are, not really doing anything meaningful in their own lives. Or people who have, very low self-esteem or feelings of inferiority. All these kinds of people will hate on others and try to bring others down because why? Because it helps to lessen their own pain. And, often such haters, it's known, they disguise themselves as, very righteous individuals doing the right thing for humanity or for the movement. But, no, not really. And you see that because even when there have been, when somebody's really trying to make solutions or improvements to areas in which they've expressed concern, it just doesn't stop them. It doesn't appease them. They will keep actively hating on others because for them, the bad always outweighs the good, no matter how much good there is, So, we know the internet, it makes it so easy to anonymously or even openly hate. And we see so much of it, people with the kind of issues, that I've just mentioned, then they can spend hours posting mean comments, because it's a mini escape from insecurity and from pain. And it temporarily makes them feel better. It is a sad state. And unfortunately, it's become, much too common. It's known in the, psychologists know this, and, too common amongst devotees as well. And, we have to examine, we have to look, what kind of person am I becoming? I can't walk around with a mouth full of scriptures and a heart full of hate, as they say. But, beyond identifying or dealing with these psychological and emotional issues, as devotees, we're going to look deeper than the psychologists. We know that, a fever in the body is a symptom of a disease, and that treating only the symptoms isn't really enough. So we know we have to get to the root of a disease. And we know from the verses in Bhagavad Gita, we all know, that tell us how things work, that from lust, anger arises, and from anger, delusion arises, and from delusion, memory is bewildered, and then intelligence gets lost, and then one falls down again into the material pool. So, I think, sometimes people, they just limit this word lust, to, sexual desire. It's not at all. It's something so pervasive. It means desire. What do you want? And I want something, and I'm frustrated. So, when we experience or we see anger, then we have to consider, what do I desire that is being frustrated? What is it that we want that we're not getting? And again, for devotees, we're going to go even deeper to really get down to the root. And according to Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, envy is the root cause of our material existence. This is like deep, and we have to get it. Behind all the symptoms we've talked about lies the biggest problem that we all face, and that is envy. It's the default setting in the material world, and it is the cause of our bondage. It's the cause of our bondage. Man, we got to get it. So this, it isn't just a casual discussion we're having here. It's like an essential topic we need to explore and understand deeply, and learn to see it and work to overcome it. It's not easy to see. It can be very subtle, because often we have a superficial idea of what it is, that is just like jealousy, I want something somebody else has, I'm embarrassed to say I remember in early days hearing about envy, and I thought, yeah, I'm not really an envious person. Hare Krishna, was that ever naive? And Krishna allows us to be blinded, and time reveals so much, You walk around thinking, you're something, and then, one day, Krishna opens some door in your heart that and you enter in there and you go, oh my God, that's where all that envy is. Hare Krishna, and it's not surprising that it's hidden. The word envy, it comes from invidia, which means non-sight. I think a Latin word. It means non-sight. It, suggesting that envy, it leads to a form of blindness, and you just can't see things properly. So neither you see it in yourself, and you're looking out and you're blind and you can't, see how it's, you're just missing the full picture of everything, what's going on. And that pain of envy, it's described as like the most almost frantic sense of emptiness inside oneself. And yet, it's just hard to see and hard to admit even to ourselves. I mean, once I remember seeing that, a friend of mine, just a pretty good friend, she was having some problem, and she was really saying some kind of heavy stuff about some other, people, and, I was suffering a lot that particular day from, I was on some heavy medication for some pain, and I probably said something that I wouldn't have normally said, but I was just very frank that I thought it was, enviousness that was causing her frustration. And it was so upsetting to her that she just, blocked me and has never spoke to me again, and it's like, oh, well, I'm sorry about that. But it's hard to admit. It's hard to admit to ourselves. It's hard to see it. But in Mahabharata it says that envy it's deeply ingrained in the human psyche, and it is common to all times and all people. And of course there's varying degrees, from just a faint discomfort, easily overcome, to a very destructive and malicious feeling that leads to, deep resentment, and it attempts to sabotage others' success, and even involves wishing harm on others or feeling pleasure at someone else's misfortune. And often it's directed towards people that we're close to, in family or in community. So it's not surprising amongst devotees, in some ways, or people that we feel that we're in competition with. It's known to be more strong, to come out more strongly. And so, if it stays bottled up, then it does really morph into deep resentment, which is the reassignment of the pain that accompanies our own sense of failure and inferiority onto someone else, some kind of boogeyman, like, the GBCs or the sannyasis or the immigrants or the abusers or the women or the men or the gays or, everybody, there's always somebody else to hate on, so it's possible to just become literally consumed by our envy. And I have seen it happen, not to some devotees. And it's important to know, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he explains why envy is so destructive for a devotee, why it's the royal road to destruction. He says, I will read this. He says, the goal of bhakti is love. Envy and love are contradictory, and hence mutually exclusive. Wherever there is envy, there is no question of love. And wherever there is love, there is no question of envy. And he goes, that's one quote, then he goes on further. I mean, he speaks about these things a lot, and he goes on to explain that envy is the leader of all the 6 internal enemies, lust, anger, greed, illusion, pride. It's all included in envy. And again, explaining that Vaishnava Dharma is supposed to be non-envious religion. It consists of compassion for the fallen souls, eagerness in chanting the holy name, and serving the Vaishnavas. That's what it is, in a nutshell. And it stands on one side, and envy stands on the other side as an opposite. And wherever the word envy, is there, it's in Sanskrit, matsarya. It's there over and over in all of our Shastra. Wherever it's fully understood that its influence is the competitor of divine love, or prema. And that's why the Srimad Bhagavatam, it begins, right in the second verse, it's like almost the first thing being said, dharma projita kaitavo, that the path of Srimad Bhagavatam is nirmat saranam satam, nirmat saranam satam, that is completely free. It's free of the flaw of envy. And it's understandable only by those who are completely free of envy, who are pure in heart, And I think in the purport of that verse, it's mentioned that all sufferings of the jiva arise due to enviousness. So this is profound philosophical understanding. It's not, finger pointing. It's what we need to understand to be devotees, to understand our philosophy. And, I apologize. I didn't really mean for this to turn into, a full class about anger, hate, and envy. I started out just trying to encourage you to read the book my husband wrote, and it's turned into this. But the reason I'm doing this is because, usually when I'm about to give a talk, I think about it, I ponder over it for a few days before, writing some notes and then recording. So when I started thinking about this talk and this subject matter, all of a sudden all these, really relevant bits of information kept suddenly, popping up, on my screen, a lecture about this, a quote about that. And, it just became so apparent to me that Krishna was sending me information that I needed to hear and that happened to be relevant to this talk. So I apologize if this is, it's not full of stories and maybe it's a little boring, but I do feel that it's so important for each of us to try to understand the root cause, of our bondage. Where does it lay inside of us? How is it impacting, my life? How it contaminates our service or our hearts? It may not be such a big issue for many devotees, but, if I'm not, crying when I chant the holy name, and if I'm not just filled with the joy and satisfaction of Krishna consciousness, then, most likely, envy is lurking in some corner of our heart, So I think that is why many of our acharyas have given detailed explanations of how envy works. So I'm not done yet. I still want to share a bit more about these points, because I listened to a very nice class from Bhaktivedanta Maharaj, and he was reading from the third canto, Kapila Dev's instructions, where he explains very clearly, how the extraordinary purifying power of devotional service and of chanting the holy names, how it becomes blocked by envy. It's extremely powerful, but it can become blocked. And he explained that there's a very clear process of how this happens. It happens in 4 stages. and there's the progressive results from each stage. You know, it's just like cancer. You know, it's identifiable at different stages of severity. And, you know, in the same way like cancer, in early stages, you know, you can get rid of it. So, you know, we hope to catch it at the early stages when it's still curable. So he explained that, I'm not sure if this is from Vishwanath Chakravarti or if it's there in Kapila's instruction, but anyway, it's relevant. That the first stage, when there's enviousness at a first stage, it's called avagya, if I got that right, avagya. And, you know, it starts innocently. You know, we have a slight envy, meaning that I see somebody, but I see from a little above them. I'm superior to him. I'm better than that person. There's a little pride, you know, that somehow you set yourself above others, even in a subtle way, and it seems innocent, but if it's not checked, it's detrimental. And, you know, so it's explained that the result of even this innocent arrogance is, even you haven't done anything really bad, you know, that the Lord in the heart sees it. And if we don't rectify it, then our pretension grows. And the result is that the results of devotional service become somewhat withdrawn. And so this stage, you know, we can rectify, we can say, oh, you know, and try to see everyone in relation to Krishna, and we have to catch ourselves. But if we don't, you know, allow this slight attitude of disrespect, you know, it will grow. So then the second stage will come, and the second stage is not sure if I got the Sanskrit, but in the second stage, it's pride increases, and it increases, and envy gets stronger to the point where, you know, I see other people and I just don't even want to see their face, and we think, oh, look at that person, he calls himself a devotee, but actually blah, blah, blah. And, you know, we really harbor very bad feelings towards others. And, you know, the result of that is that we just don't get the kind of reciprocation from the Lord in our service. You know, there's almost like no result. It's like we feel like we're running on a treadmill and we're not getting anywhere. I can relate to that. Yeah. And so, you know, we need some other source of satisfaction. So we do our devotional service, but not really for the pleasure of the Lord, but because others will say, oh, isn't she a nice devotee? And, you know, we'll derive our pleasure from that. And we want and we need that appreciation from others. So, you know, we should catch ourselves, and, you know, we can ask, is my, you know, chanting and my service, is it the same when I'm alone as when I'm with others? You know, if not, it's said that we are becoming hypocritical. So then that moves on, if we don't stop it, to the third stage, which is called Vesha. And then, you know, you actively, you want something bad to happen. You might even pray for it, you know. I hope he really, you know, Krishna really bashes him, you know. I hope Krishna, you know, punishes him for his offense, especially to me. You know, and there's an active hate. And, you know, the result of that is that, you know, you just can't hear Krishna anymore. Kapila says you become a separatist. Somebody does something wrong, and you don't feel for him. A separatist, he explains, it means someone is suffering, and I don't feel for that. I'm even happy for that when I see their suffering. So such a devotee, this kind of devotee, Kapila Dev says, he will never find peace, never feel peace, If someone, this is the thing, if somebody's inflicted pain on us and we develop hatred toward him, well, then we can't stop thinking about it, It's like Duryodhana, when Draupadi laughed at him, he just couldn't forget it. It was just like, it just built up and built up until there was a whole war, And because the mind is agitated over and over thinking about, and so the result is that you can't chant Hare Krishna. You can't chant properly because there's no peace, because hatred is there. And, one becomes very disturbed. So then that leads to the fourth and final stage, which is the worst, ninda, where it becomes visible, that we just openly and unabashedly blaspheme devotees and insult devotees, and, our heart is just burning. And at the same time, you think you're right, that you have good reason to say or do this. I'm just telling the truth, This is what's said, And the result of that is that Krishna says, I'm just never pleased with their devotional service. I turn my face away from such a person. Oh, that's even painful to hear. And, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says that blasphemy is the worst kind of violence. That now I've just become so fully immersed in ignorance, and it is, very condemned. So it's a bit scary, isn't it, to hear all of this? I mean, I'm just quoting the Shastras, not pointing fingers. I'm like, whoa, I'm pretty sure I've, reached the third stage and I really got serious cancer. I really got to do something, so, we have some envy, or we wouldn't be in material bodies. And we need to see it, we need to check it, and not, make justifications for it. If we're feeling, I'm really not making much progress, and I don't feel satisfied in devotional service, the chances are, we just got a lot of work to do. And, in light of this, it's easier to understand now why Srila Prabhupada used to say, spiritual life is like the razor's edge, or it's like walking a tightrope. How careful, we have to be. But, this is not, to discourage or depress us, although it, can be like, oh gosh, this is where I am. But, Krishna is so kind, and our acharyas, they give lots of advice on how to move forward despite these problematic things. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he gives specifically, I think it's like 4 or 5 things, specific things that we should try to do when we recognize that we, have envy. And, the first thing he said was that you should try not to disturb others. Rather, try to be compassionate toward others as a father is towards his son. That's one thing. And to really endeavor to respect others, especially elders, because, respect cures hatred. And, the third thing he said was to feed others. don't discriminate between your own stomach and the stomach of others. And to try to see with equal vision, and he says that even if we just try to see Krishna in the heart of every living entity, even if we just remember, that he's there and we're trying to be mindful, this is purifying, and it's a sign that we have faith and that we know we have no right, to hate anyone or to look down on anyone. And, the fourth thing, he encourages that we endeavor to develop a mood of friendliness, or mitra, that we should not look at others as competitors. And Srila Prabhupada, he said Krishna consciousness means to be a friend of everyone. And how he signed his letters, your ever well-wisher, to everyone, because he was indeed, in Mahabharata, Narada Muni told Krishna, I don't remember what the incident was, but he said something, he said, there is a weapon not made of steel, but more powerful than steel, and that is kind words. A powerful weapon. Interesting. And then, the last thing, more powerful than anything, is glorifying and associating with Vaishnavas. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he says again, he just talks about this a lot in his books. He says that by associating with Vaishnavas, and I can hear people, if you're really a Vaishnava. Anyway. But by associating with Vaishnavas, saintliness will manifest in our hearts, and sinfulness will be completely removed. And when our hearts are clean, a ray from the sun of prema will enter. And this ray, which enriches our hearts with prema, it comes from the heart of a saintly Vaishnava. And this is the way to attain prema and to give up pratishta, which is a manifestation of envy. And so these are this is the advice. We can work on these things. And in this way, the heart will become soft. If our heart is becoming harder and harder, something's wrong. It's supposed to become soft. And, our consciousness will, move away from envy. Not want it, want to get rid of it. And that is the beauty of Vaishnava or Vedic culture, that it's designed in such a way to help everyone to become free from envy at every stage of life. There's a process of how to give up selfishness and to learn to give more than you take. That's a culture. Like Grihastas, they're supposed to feed others. They're supposed to give in charity, and then they become more purified. And, brahmacharis, they're supposed to practice austerity, and they're supposed to serve others, to give up selfishness. And, students are supposed to honor their teachers, and, all of our dharmas and our sadhanas, that all have, this purpose. They're designed to decrease envy and to clean our hearts, to eventually come to the stage where life is not just about what I want, but that whatever we do, it's just to make Srila Prabhupada and Krishna happy. So simple. It's so difficult. And not because I'll get appreciation for it, not to make myself feel good, and not because it's my duty only, and not out of fear or guilt or not because someone's watching, but just because we want to please Guru and Gauranga. You know, it's not such an easy thing to come to that stage. And Srila Prabhupada said Krishna consciousness is simple. I mean, that's a simple thing, but it's not easy, you know. So the goal of everything we do as devotees, it's simply to clean the heart and to arrive eventually at Trinadapi Sunichena. And probably we have to do more than just recite that daily in order to arrive at that consciousness, you know. And at least we can begin to try, we should try to see that whatever situation I'm confronted with in life, fair, unfair, horrible, happy, whatever it is, it's Krishna's arrangement, and that he is giving me what I need to come to the point of Trinadapi Sunichena. That, you know, that's the vision of a Vaishnava. That's how a devotee sees life. So, okay, I have really rambled on about this. I hope it's not been too boring or too heavy or too discouraging. But, you know, relationships and attitudes in devotee community, you know, all these things, you know, this has been on my mind. So I felt the need to explore it more, you know, deeply. And, you know, of course, there are so many wonderful, very humble, genuine devotees who are clearly examples of non-enviousness, who, you know, are serving with joy and they have no interest in battling out issues. You know, intelligent devotees are very careful about what they hear, and they just don't want to waste time. So, you know, we can take encouragement. There are many, many devotees that, you know, can lift us up and who are really good association and who can encourage us to go in the right direction, you know. I know for myself nowadays, for me, I've become much more cautious about what I listen to. To me, what's more important than the topic of discussion is really the tone of voice that I hear in the discussion. You know, and as soon as it sounds like, you know, pushing an agenda or sounds disrespectful or insulting, you know, it's just, you know, shut it down. Don't want to hear it. It's not going to be beneficial. And even, you know, because sometimes even if you're right about something, you're wrong if the attitude is incorrect, you know. So I will end here. I hope that I just hope there's something useful in all of that. I know it's useful for me, you know. I know I need to hear these things. So that's why I'm talking about it, you know. Hare Krishna.